This woman, her name is Melissa, and at 29 years old, she orchestrated what she believed was the perfect exit strategy from her 3-year relationship. She had blueprints, backup plans, and a new man waiting in the wings. But when her carefully constructed house of cards came crashing down, she lost absolutely everything. Her job, her home, her dignity. And the twisted part? She still believes she was the victim. Hi, I'm Emma, and welcome to Mrs. Emma, where I bring you the most compelling real-life stories that will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew about love, loyalty, and the consequences of our choices. My name is Melissa, and if you had asked me 6 months ago where I thought my life would be today, I would have painted you a completely different picture. I thought I had everything mapped out, every decision calculated, every move strategic. But looking back now from this cramped studio apartment that drains my savings every single month, I realized just how spectacularly wrong everything went. Let me take you back to where this all started. I had been sharing a home with my boyfriend for 3 years. We'll call him David. It was his house, which always felt like a subtle reminder that I was living in his space, playing by his rules. Don't get me wrong, not paying rent was convenient, but there was something suffocating about it too. Like I was a guest in my own relationship. David was what people call dependable. Steady, the kind of man who never forgot to handle the utilities or take out the garbage on collection day. And honestly, that predictability was slowly draining the life out of me. Every evening followed the same script. He would come home from work, microwave leftovers, and disappear into his video games for hours. While I sat there, feeling invisible, watching my youth slip away one boring evening at a time. I work in a corporate office. Nothing particularly exciting, just standard administrative tasks that keep the company running. But it paid my bills and gave me something to do during the day. That's where I met him, the man who would eventually become the catalyst for everything that followed. We'll call him Marcus. Marcus was different from David in every conceivable way. Where David was predictable, Marcus was spontaneous. Where David barely noticed when I changed my appearance, Marcus would compliment the smallest details. A new shade of lipstick, the way I styled my hair differently. He actually saw me, or at least that's what I convinced myself was happening. There was just one small complication. Marcus was engaged to a woman from another department. She was the type who constantly shared those matching outfit photos on social media with captions full of heart emojis and declarations of eternal love. It made me physically cringe every time I scrolled past them, but I could sense something beneath the surface of their relationship. A crack in the foundation that I could exploit if I was clever enough. During our lunch breaks and late evening work sessions, I noticed the way Marcus looked at me. Those lingering glances when he thought nobody else was watching. The subtle comments about how his fiancée didn't understand his humor or his ambitions. Classic signs that he was already emotionally checking out of his relationship, whether he admitted it to himself or not. I started making calculated changes. Staying at the office later when I knew Marcus would be there. Dressing more carefully in the mornings, selecting outfits that would catch his attention. Meanwhile, David never even glanced up from his gaming screen when I walked through the door. I could have shaved my head or dyed my hair neon green, and he probably wouldn't have noticed until days later. But Marcus noticed everything. The frustrating part was the pace of it all. Marcus would flirt. We would have these deep, meaningful conversations about life and relationships and dreams. But he never took that final step. His wedding was still several months away, and I was running out of patience. I couldn't just sit around hoping the universe would magically align in my favor. I needed an actual strategy, a plan of action. I started being more deliberate about sharing my unhappiness. Dropping hints to Marcus about how disconnected I felt at home. How David took me completely for granted, treating me more like furniture than a partner. And Marcus absorbed every word, eventually opening up about his own relationship struggles, how controlling his fiancée was about finances, how she monitored his whereabouts constantly, how she didn't approve of his friendships. I positioned myself as the exact opposite of everything he complained about. Easygoing, understanding, fun, supportive. When he vented about her, I would just listen, nodding sympathetically, occasionally suggesting that he deserved someone who truly appreciated him for who he was. At home with David, I started creating distance. Why invest energy in someone I was planning to leave anyway? When he suggested date nights, I invented excuses. When he tried to have serious conversations about our future together, I changed topics or claimed exhaustion from work. And honestly, it felt empowering in a strange way. Like I was finally taking control of my own destiny instead of just accepting whatever mediocre life had been handed to me. The breakthrough came when Marcus mentioned that his fiancée wanted him to delete all his social media because she felt threatened by female coworkers commenting on his posts. That's when I knew I had found my opening. I started interacting with everything he posted online, liking his photos, leaving supportive comments, making sure I looked absolutely stunning in any group pictures from company events. His fiancée definitely noticed. She started showing up at our office more frequently to pick him up, shooting these suspicious glances in my direction. Good. Let her feel insecure. That's what happens when you try to control your partner instead of just being better. Meanwhile, I started posting more couple photos with David on social media to maintain appearances. Let everyone believe we were perfectly happy while I worked on my real plan behind closed doors. The ironic thing was that David seemed genuinely pleased by the extra online attention to our relationship. He had absolutely no idea I was just creating cover while I figured out my escape route. Everything shifted at a mandatory company retreat about an hour outside the city. Most employees planned to commute there and back the same day, but Marcus and I both decided to book overnight accommodations. His fiancée couldn't attend due to family commitments, and David didn't even ask if he could join me. Just assumed I preferred going alone, which I absolutely did, but he could have at least pretended to care. The daytime activities were tedious corporate team-building exercises. But that evening at the hotel bar, the atmosphere between Marcus and me completely transformed. He was drinking more than usual, visibly frustrated because his fiancée kept texting him every few minutes, demanding to know what he was doing and who he was with. I played my role perfectly. Sympathetic without being pushy, just the right amount of understanding and validation. When he walked me back to my room afterward, I could feel the electricity between us. This was it. This was finally my moment. But then he just said goodnight and walked away to his own room like nothing significant had happened. I was furious, absolutely livid. Here I was, looking incredible, being everything he could possibly want, and he was still playing it safe. That's when I realized I needed to be bolder. Around midnight, I went to his room with some excuse about needing assistance with a work presentation we had the following morning. He let me inside, and we spent hours talking about everything. Our relationships, our frustrations, how we both felt completely trapped in our current lives. By the time sunrise arrived, we had finally crossed that line. It was everything I had imagined. He was so different from David, actually passionate, present, paying genuine attention to every word I said instead of half listening while mentally somewhere else. When we returned to the office that Monday, everything between us had changed. Secret glances across conference rooms, private messages throughout the workday, finding excuses to be alone together. It was thrilling in a way my relationship at home had never been, not even in the beginning. But Marcus was still engaged, still going through all the motions of wedding planning with her, and I needed him to make a definitive choice, soon. I started pushing harder, talking about how we both deserved genuine happiness, how life was too brief to settle for someone who didn't truly see you. But I also had to be careful not to seem desperate or clingy like his fiancée clearly was. At home, I was completely detached. David would try to discuss his day or suggest weekend plans, and I would give him minimal responses while texting Marcus under the table. He wanted to plan romantic evenings, and I claimed exhaustion from work projects. Which technically wasn't lying, because all this sneaking around was definitely exhausting. But it was also addictive. The danger, the secrecy. Having someone who actually wanted me instead of just taking me for granted. After weeks of this double life, I knew something had to give. Marcus was getting anxious about his wedding approaching, and I was tired of the charade. That's when I developed what seemed like the perfect strategy. I would wait for Marcus to end his engagement first. Let him be the one to break it off so I wouldn't technically be the other woman when we went public. Then, once he was free, I would leave David, and we could finally be together properly without all the deception and guilt. It was foolproof. I just needed patience, and to help Marcus see that his engagement was obviously a terrible mistake. I started pointing out all the ways his fiancée was wrong for him. When she texted during our lunch dates, I would make subtle comments about how insecure and controlling she appeared. When he mentioned wedding planning stress, I suggested that maybe all that conflict was a sign they weren't actually compatible. I was essentially his relationship therapist, except I was guiding him toward the conclusion I wanted. The beautiful part was that everything I said was genuinely true. They really weren't right for each other. I was just helping him see what was already obvious. Meanwhile, I had to figure out my exit strategy with David. I couldn't just vanish overnight. I had belongings at his house. We had joint bills and accounts, all that complicated relationship infrastructure you accumulate over 3 years. Plus, I needed confirmation that Marcus was truly committed to ending his engagement before I destroyed all my safety nets. So I started creating distance without being too obvious. I would start arguments over trivial things, act irritated when David wanted quality time together, basically making him think our relationship was naturally deteriorating on its own. That way, if he ever questioned me later, I could honestly claim we had been having problems for months before I met someone else. The tricky part was timing everything perfectly. I needed Marcus to break up with his fiancée before I left David, but not so far in advance that he might reconsider or find someone else in the interim. I also had to ensure David wouldn't do anything extreme when I finally ended things, like change the locks or throw my possessions onto the lawn. He owned the house after all, so I needed to be strategic. I started being randomly affectionate to David sometimes just to keep him confused and hopeful. I would have these occasional moments where I acted like the girlfriend he remembered from when we first got together, then pull away again the next day. It kept him believing things might improve between us instead of realizing they were already completely finished in my mind. During all of this, Marcus and I were getting increasingly serious about our future together. We would spend hours on late-night phone calls after David went to sleep, making elaborate plans for what our life would look like once we were both free. He talked about destinations he wanted to take me on vacation, experiences he wanted to share with someone who actually understood him. It was everything I had been dreaming about. But his fiancée was definitely starting to suspect something. She appeared at our office more frequently, asked him increasingly detailed questions about his day and who he had been working with. A couple of times she even approached me directly, inquiring about specific projects Marcus and I were collaborating on, like she was testing whether our stories aligned. I remained calm and friendly during those interactions, but internally I was starting to panic. If she figured out what was happening before Marcus had the chance to end things properly, everything could collapse and destroy my entire plan. That's when Marcus finally told me he had made his decision. He was definitely going to end the engagement, but he wanted to wait until after their engagement party since it was already planned and paid for. He didn't want to humiliate her by canceling at the last minute, but he promised he would tell her privately afterward that he couldn't go through with the wedding. It seemed perfect. I just had to wait a few more weeks, and then I would finally be free to start my new life with someone who actually appreciated me. Everything was going to work out exactly as I had planned it. So the engagement party happened, and I waited for Marcus to follow through on his promise. But then days passed, then an entire week, and he was still engaged like nothing had changed. Every time I brought it up at work, he had a new excuse. His fiancée was stressed about a deadline. Her family was visiting. It wasn't the right time for such a serious conversation. I started realizing that maybe Marcus enjoyed having the best of both worlds way more than he actually wanted to leave his safe, predictable life. Maybe all his complaints about his fiancée were just venting, not actual plans to change anything. Meanwhile, I was stuck at home with David, still pretending everything was normal while I was dying inside, waiting for my real life to begin. But then something happened that made me realize how catastrophically I had miscalculated everything. David started acting completely different, asking more questions about my workday, wanting to know why I was always on my phone, suggesting we spend more quality time together on weekends. It was like he suddenly remembered he had a girlfriend and decided to start paying attention again. At first, I thought maybe he was just going through a phase, but then he did something that terrified me. He suggested we attend a work happy hour event that I had casually mentioned was happening. The same happy hour where Marcus would obviously be with his fiancée. I tried everything to get out of it. Made up excuses about being tired or having other commitments, but David was being persistent and romantic about it. He kept saying he wanted to meet the people I worked with, that he wanted to be more involved in my world. It was literally the worst possible timing for him to start caring about my life outside our relationship. The night of the happy hour, I was completely on edge. I spent forever getting ready, trying to look good but not too good. When we arrived at the bar, I immediately scanned the room for Marcus. He was there with his fiancée, and they actually looked genuinely happy together, which was shocking and infuriating. She was laughing at something he said, hanging on his arm, and I felt this stab of jealousy that really surprised me. David started introducing himself to everyone, being friendly and social. It was actually annoying how charming he could be when he made an effort. People seemed to genuinely like him, which made me feel strange because I had been thinking of him as this boring loser for months. When we finally got introduced to Marcus and his fiancée, I could barely breathe. I introduced David, and Marcus looked guilty as hell. His fiancée was being incredibly sweet and friendly, asking David about his work, complimenting him, and David was eating up all the attention, being his usual nice guy self. But I could see Marcus watching me the whole time, and I knew he was thinking about everything we had done together, all the plans we had made for our future. The worst part was when his fiancée started talking about their wedding planning. How excited she was about everything. How helpful Marcus had been with all the details. I wanted to scream. This was the same man who had been telling me for weeks that he was going to end things with her. That he couldn't wait to start over with someone who actually understood him. But here he was, nodding along, playing the perfect fiancé like nothing had ever happened between us. After about an hour of torture, I claimed I had a terrible headache and basically dragged David home early. He kept talking about how nice everyone seemed, how much he had enjoyed finally meeting my coworkers. He said Marcus seemed really cool, and I nearly lost it completely. If he only knew what that cool guy had been doing with his girlfriend for the past 2 months. That night I couldn't sleep at all. I kept thinking about how comfortable Marcus looked with his fiancée, how natural they seemed together. Maybe I had been completely deluding myself about this whole thing. Maybe he never had any real intention of leaving her, and I was just the exciting distraction while she was the one he actually wanted to marry. The following week at work, everything imploded in the worst possible way. I was trying to act normal and professional when Marcus pulled me aside into an empty conference room. I thought he was finally going to tell me he had broken up with his fiancée over the weekend. But instead, he said we needed to stop whatever this thing was between us. He was getting cold feet about the wedding, he explained, but he thought that meant he should focus on his actual relationship instead of destroying his entire life. I just stared at him like he was speaking an alien language. After everything we had shared together, everything we had planned for our future, he was choosing her. I didn't handle it well at all. I started crying right there in the conference room, asking him how he could just throw away what we had like it meant nothing. He got uncomfortable and started backing toward the door, saying maybe we had gotten carried away. Maybe it was just the excitement of something new and forbidden. That's when I realized I had been completely played. While I was planning my entire future around this man, he was just having fun with me. He never actually intended to leave his perfect little fiancée. I was just entertainment until reality set in. I was so angry and hurt that I did something incredibly stupid. I went back to my desk and sent him this long, emotional email about how he was making the biggest mistake of his life. How we were obviously meant to be together. How he was going to regret this decision forever. I poured my heart out completely, telling him exactly how I felt and describing what I wanted our life together to look like. It was desperate and pathetic, but I sent it anyway because I couldn't believe this was how everything was going to end after all my careful planning. That's when everything went completely wrong in ways I never could have predicted. Apparently, Marcus's fiancée had access to his work email account. She saw my message, and suddenly everyone in the entire company knew about our affair. Human resources got involved immediately. There was this horrible meeting, and I ended up getting fired for unprofessional conduct and workplace harassment. Marcus got to keep his job, of course, because he claimed I had pursued him aggressively and he tried to stop it. Which is complete garbage, but whatever. He threw me completely under the bus to save his own career and his precious engagement. Meanwhile, word somehow got back to David about what had happened. Not from me. I was still trying to figure out how to tell him everything, but from someone at his gym who apparently knew someone from my company. Small world, right? So I came home that day to find David sitting at the kitchen table with this expression on his face I had never seen before. He knew everything, not just about Marcus, but about how long it had been going on. About my whole plan to leave him. About all the lies I had been telling him for months. He didn't yell or cry or beg me to explain myself. He just told me very calmly that I had exactly 2 weeks to find somewhere else to live. He was so controlled about it, which somehow made it feel worse than if he had completely lost it and screamed at me. I tried to apologize, to explain that it wasn't supposed to happen this way, that everything had just gotten out of control. But he was already completely checked out emotionally. He wouldn't even look at me while I was talking. So now here I am, 3 months later. I'm unemployed, living in this tiny studio apartment that costs half my unemployment check every month. Marcus won't return any of my calls or texts. I think his fiancée made him block my number completely. My few work friends won't talk to me because the whole situation is too messy and embarrassing. And David, my ex-boyfriend, has apparently already started seeing someone new. I saw them together at the grocery store last week, and she looks exactly like the kind of woman who would never do what I did. She's probably boring and predictable, but she's also probably loyal and trustworthy, which I guess is what matters to him now. I keep thinking about how different everything would be if Marcus had just followed through on his promises to me. Or if David hadn't found out about everything so soon. I had a real plan, and it should have worked perfectly. But somehow everyone else ruined it by not playing their parts the way they were supposed to. Now I'm starting completely over at 29. And honestly, I'm still not entirely sure how I ended up being the villain in this whole story, when all I wanted was to be happy with someone who actually appreciated me. But I guess that's just how things go sometimes when you try to take control of your own life instead of just settling for whatever you're given. Melissa's story is a stark reminder that manipulation and deception never lead to the happiness we think they will. When we prioritize our own desires above the truth and the people around us, we often end up losing everything we were trying to gain. Sometimes the boring, predictable relationship we're trying to escape is actually the stable foundation we needed all along. And sometimes the exciting new person who makes us feel alive is just a mirror reflecting back our own selfishness and poor choices. If Melissa's story resonated with you, or if you have thoughts on what she could have done differently, I want to hear from you in the comments below. Have you ever been in a situation where you had to choose between security and excitement? How did you handle it? If you enjoyed this story, please hit that like button. Share this video with friends who might find it interesting or cautionary. And don't forget to subscribe to Mrs. Emma so you never miss another compelling real-life story that will make you think, feel, and question everything you thought you knew about relationships and consequences. I'm Emma, and I'll see you in the next story. Until then, remember that the grass isn't always greener on the other side. Sometimes it's just fertilized with lies. Take care, everyone.